They tried to erase her name, not because she failed, but because what she did in 1716 terrified the people who wrote history. If you were alive back then, you would never have heard her story spoken out loud. No books, no public records, no monuments. Only whispers carried from one generation to the next, always lowered voices, always the same warning at the end. Never say her name near men with power. History calls that silence order. She called it survival. In the early years of the 18th century, life moved slowly, but pain did not. Pain arrived early, stayed late, and never asked permission. The world was divided cleanly and cruelly, those who owned land and those who were owned by it. Plantation owners lived surrounded by walls, laws, and weapons. Everyone else lived surrounded by rules they did not write and punishments they could not escape. She was born into that second world. No one recorded the exact day she entered it. No one cared enough to write it down. What is known is that she was young when she learned a lesson that would shape the rest of her life. Silence was safer than truth. She learned it watching her mother bow her head even when she was right. She learned it watching men in fine coats speak softly while destroying lives with a signature or a nod. She learned it when she realized that justice was not blind. It could see very clearly who mattered and who did not. By the time she became a woman, fear was no longer something that surprised her. It was familiar, predictable, almost routine. Each morning began the same way, before sunrise, before warmth, before choice. Work did not wait, pain did not ask, and hope, if it existed at all, had learned to stay quiet. The plantation owners called this the natural order. She called it a cage. What history rarely explains is how long suffering can stretch before it snaps. Years pass, decades sometimes. People assume that those at the bottom simply accept their place. What they do not see is the pressure building layer by layer, moment by moment. Every humiliation adds weight. Every injustice sharpens something inside that cannot stay buried forever. She watched friends disappear without explanation. She watched families broken apart with the casual cruelty of someone moving furniture. She watched men laugh while deciding the fate of people whose names they never bothered to learn. And still, she said nothing. Not because she was weak, but because she was watching. In 1716, something changed. No one agrees on the exact moment. Some say it was a single act of cruelty that went too far. Others say it was the quiet realization that nothing would ever change unless someone forced it to. What is certain is this. That year, a woman the world believed powerless made a decision history would spend centuries trying to bury. She stopped waiting for mercy. The men who ruled her world believed themselves untouchable. Plantation owners lived with the confidence of people who had never been held accountable. Laws protected them. Soldiers answered to them. Even the church often looked away. They believed fear flowed in only one direction. They were wrong. Revenge, when written by history's winners, is often described as madness or savagery. But when you strip away the language designed to discredit it, what remains is intention, planning, patience, and a deep understanding of how power actually works. She understood something they did not. Systems fail when the people who uphold them feel unsafe. She did not act in public. She did not shout. She did not threaten. She moved quietly, the way people do when they have learned that attention can be deadly. Every step she took was calculated. Every risk weighed carefully. This was not a moment of rage. It was the result of years of observation. The coal furnace was not chosen by accident. It was a place of labor, heat, control, a symbol of how energy was extracted, how bodies were consumed to keep wealth moving upward. The men who benefited from that system never imagined it could turn against them. That assumption would cost them everything. When the first man disappeared, it was treated as an inconvenience. Powerful men do not panic over one missing colleague. They assume accidents, illness, travel, silence. When the second did not return, concern crept in, but only briefly. Power teaches arrogance. Arrogance delays fear. By the time they understood what was happening, it was too late. History records numbers coldly. 14, a statistic stripped of context, emotion, or consequence. But behind that number were men who believed they would never be afraid. Men who had spent their lives deciding the fate of others without consequence. In 1716, fear finally visited them. What happened inside that furnace is rarely described in detail, not out of respect, but because detail would force uncomfortable questions. Questions about morality, about justice, about how far a human being can be pushed before the world they live in becomes unrecognizable. She did not leave a manifesto. She did not ask to be understood. She knew history would not be kind to her. It never is to those who break its rules. What followed was not justice. It was erasure. Records vanished. Names were removed. Stories were rewritten. The focus shifted away from her and toward restoring order. The system repaired itself the only way it knew how, by pretending the threat never existed. They wanted the world to forget. But memory is stubborn. Her story survived the way forbidden stories always do. Passed quietly, reshaped by time but never fully lost. Each generation added its own interpretation, its oath. One admiration. Some called her a monster. Others called her a warning. A few dared to call her what she believed herself to be. Free. The uncomfortable truth is this. History prefers victims who remain victims. It celebrates endurance more than resistance. It honors silence because silence does not challenge power. A woman who refuses her place does not fit neatly into textbooks or speeches. So they buried her. Yet here you are, centuries later, still listening. That alone tells you everything you need to know about how dangerous her story truly is. Because the real threat was never what she did. It was what her existence proved. That power is not permanent. That fear can change sides. And that even in a world designed to crush certain people, one decision can fracture an entire system. In 1716, history tried to bury her name. It failed. They will tell you this story is about violence. It is not. It is about what happens when fear changes sides. Before 1716, no one looked twice at her. That was the point. In a world built on power, invisibility was the safest place to exist. She moved through rooms without being remembered, spoke when spoken to, lowered her eyes when men with authority passed by. People like her survived by blending into the background, by becoming part of the environment. Useful, replaceable, silent. History rewards those who make noise. It punishes those who break rules quietly. She understood that early. Every day followed a rhythm that never changed. Wake before the sun. Work until the body stopped asking questions. Obey orders that came wrapped in politeness but carried the weight of threat. Plantation life was not chaos. It was organized cruelty, structured to look normal to those who benefited from it. The men who owned everything called themselves civilized. They held meetings. They signed papers. They discussed profit, weather, discipline. They believed morality belonged to them by default, simply because they had inherited power. They never wondered how fragile that belief truly was. She did. She watched how they spoke to each other, how their confidence disappeared the moment they were alone. She noticed the small cracks, the arguments, the paranoia, the way fear crept in whenever something unexpected happened. Power, she realized, was not courage. It was habit. And habits can be broken. There is a lie history tells over and over again, that rebellion is loud, sudden, emotional, that it arrives with raised voices and reckless decisions. The truth is far colder. Real rebellion is patient. It studies. It waits. She waited. Years passed. Faces changed. Some plantation owners grew old. Others were replaced by younger men who learned cruelty faster than compassion. The system stayed the same. Only the names shifted. So did her resolve. By 1716, she had seen enough to know something critical. Nothing would improve on its own. No reform was coming. No rescue would arrive. The world she lived in would continue exactly as it was, unless something shattered the illusion that it was safe. And safety, she understood, was the foundation of power. The coal furnace was a place everyone avoided, not because it was hidden, but because it was ordinary. Dangerous work happened there. Heat, smoke, labor. People assumed accidents were inevitable. It was the last place anyone expected history to change. That is where she chose to act. The first time it happened, confusion spread faster than fear. Men asked questions, demanded answers, blamed workers, blamed weather, blamed chance. No one blamed her. That would have required seeing her. The second time, rumors started. Quiet ones. The kind spoken behind closed doors. Powerful men do not admit fear easily. They frame it as inconvenience, as disorder that needs correcting. By the read, the tone changed. Meetings became tense. Guards doubled. Voices lowered. Confidence cracked. Something was wrong and they could feel it. Even if they could not name it, the system they trusted had stopped protecting them. 14 is not just a number. It is a collapse. Each disappearance tightened the silence. Each unanswered question stripped away another layer of certainty. The men who once believed themselves untouchable began to realize they were being hunted, not by an army, not by a rebellion, but by the consequence of their own cruelty. History often asks whether what she did was right or wrong. That question misses the point entirely. Morality is easy to debate when you are safe. It becomes abstract when you are protected by laws, wealth, and distance. She was protected by none of that. What she understood, what terrified those in power, was that fear did not require permission. It did not need approve, and in 1716, she delivered it. The aftermath was swift and deliberate. Authorities moved quickly, not to understand, but to contain. Records were altered, language softened, blame redirected. The story was reframed until it no longer threatened the structure it had exposed. They spoke of tragedy. They spoke of restoring order. They did not speak of her. Erasing her was easier than explaining her. Safer than admitting that a single woman written off as insignificant had forced the most powerful men in her world to confront something they had never faced before: vulnerability. Her name faded from official memory, but fear lingered. Systems remember what threatens them, even when they pretend not to. New rules were written, new precautions taken. Quiet changes made that no one publicly acknowledged. That is how you know her story mattered. Legends are not born from success alone. They are run from discomfort, from the kind of truth that makes people uneasy long after the events themselves have passed. Her story survived because it carried a warning that power could never fully erase. That warning still exists. It lives in the uncomfortable feeling people get when they hear about forgotten figures who refuse to stay forgotten. It lives in the way history hesitates around certain years, certain places, certain questions it never fully answers. In 1716, a woman stepped outside the role assigned to her. History tried to correct that mistake. But silence is not the same as defeat, and the fact that you are hearing this now means the system failed again. The first thing you need to know is this: she was invisible, not because she wanted to be, not because she could hide, because the world refused to see her. 1716 was a year like any other for those who wrote history. For those in power, it was orderly, predictable, controlled. But for her, it was the year she decided to become unforgettable. She lived in a world measured by land, wealth, and obedience. Men with power considered themselves gods in human skin. Their laws were iron, their words were chains, and their eyes always watched. Every gesture she made, every breath she took was measured against their comfort, their convenience, their sense of superiority. She had learned to move silently, to blend in, to survive without being noticed. Years of watching cruelty without reaction had taught her one thing: patience is not weakness. Patience is preparation. And she had been preparing her whole life. The first incident that broke the rhythm of her world was quiet, almost imperceptible. A man disappeared, and no one noticed until it was too late. By the time the second and third vanished, whispers began. The whispers grew into tension. Confidence, once absolute, began to crack. History often misrepresents, though, some moments. It claims sudden rage, chaotic rebellion, impulsive acts. It calls it madness, but she was neither mad nor impulsive. She was precise, strategic, patient, unseen. The coal furnace became her instrument. Ordinary, mundane, overlooked. A place that symbolized labor, control, and the extraction of human energy. It was perfect, because no one thought the tool of oppression could turn against its users. She moved methodically, every plan considered, every step calculated. The first men to vanish were chosen carefully, those whose disappearance would sow confusion without immediate suspicion. By the time anyone realized what was happening, she had already moved to the next stage. The system had trained them to underestimate her. She used that against them. Fear is contagious. It spreads faster than information. By the time the fourth and fifth men did not return, panic began to seep into the rooms of power. Small things, unnoticed before, became signs of imminent threat. No one could pinpoint the cause. No one dared suspect her. 14 men in total, each disappearance deliberate, each outcome a mirror to the cruelty they had inflicted on others. Numbers may seem abstract to us now, but each represented lives built on arrogance, entitlement, and the assumption that their power was untouchable. They believed fear only flowed downhill. They were wrong. What she did was not vengeance for a moment of anger. It was the logical conclusion of observation, endurance, and deliberate intelligence. It was history bending under the weight of truth, and it terrified them. No manifesto, no speeches, no public declarations, only action and silence. They attempted to erase it immediately. Records altered, names removed, stories rewritten to ensure their version of order remained intact. They wanted her to become a myth, a cautionary tale, a whispered warning. History is designed to forgive certain crimes and condemn others. They wanted hers forgotten. They failed. Her story persisted not because the events themselves were loud, but because the consequences were undeniable. The system shifted quietly, subtly, precautions implemented, routines changed, the invisible pressure of fear applied where it could not be seen. Those who benefited most had to adjust, to be wary, to recognize that power can be challenged in ways they never imagined. Morality debates are easy when you are safe. History asks if she was right or wrong. But morality is measured differently when no laws protect you, when no one watches your back, when the very people who define justice use it only against you. Her morality was simple: survival, retribution, justice in the only form the world understood, through consequence. Even now, centuries later, her existence challenges how we define power, because she demonstrated that control is never absolute. Fear, intelligence, patience, these can shift the balance, quietly and visibly, dangerously. The world assumed she would remain powerless. History assumed her story would end in silence. But power underestimates the prepared, and fear, when wielded carefully, can be more effective than armies. Her plan was not heroic. It was human, calculated, patient, darkly poetic. She turned the very instruments of oppression into agents of reckoning. 14 men, a furnace, a world forced to reconsider the rules it believed unchangeable. They could hide records, they could rewrite accounts, but the truth persisted. Whispers spread, stories survived in shadows, and the lesson endured. The invisible can become unstoppable. History tries to comfort itself with order. It tells itself that chaos comes from loudness, from rebellion. It tells itself that the powerless remain powerless. Her story disproves that. She waited, she observed, she acted, and in 1716, she ensured that no one in her world could ever again assume they were untouchable. Erasure is temporary. Stories persist, and the world remembers what it fears most. Even now, when we speak of her, when we whisper the truths history tried to hide, we feel the same discomfort. The system was challenged, the powerful questioned, the unprepared humbled, all by one person, rendered invisible for centuries, now unforgettable. If you want, I can proceed with Structure 4, which will be even more cinematic, fast-paced, with intense hook lines every 15 to 20 seconds, for maximum retention, basically a ready-to-film script for a viral YouTube documentary. They thought she was nothing. Invisible, silent, forgotten. That is why no one saw it coming. 1716 was just another year on paper. But in her world, it was the year everything changed. Every morning, the same routine. Work, obey, survive. Every evening, the same truth. Power is cruel, and the powerless are silent. And yet, silence can be stronger than noise. She learned it watching the people who ruled her life. Men in coats and boots. Hands that signed their names to lives they destroyed. Smiles that hid cruelty like it was art. Every gesture was a lesson. Every command, an equation in control. She solved that equation, years before anyone suspected. The first disappearance was small. A man simply never returned from work. Accident, they said. Misfortune, they whispered. The second disappearance followed the same quiet pattern. Panic started subtle but unstoppable. The powerful always assume fear flows only downward. They were wrong. She moved with the precision of someone who had waited decades, every step calculated, every risk measured. The coal furnace became her tool, ordinary yet deadly. The men never imagined it could turn against them. 14 men vanished. No shouting, no chaos. Only consequence. The system reacted. Records erased. Names rewritten. History sanitized. They tried to bury her, as if silence could undo what had been done. They failed, because consequences cannot be hidden forever. Even in shadows, her presence forced change, precautions altered, routines disrupted, power reconsidered, all by one woman, invisible for years, now unstoppable. History asks morality, but morality is different when survival is the only option. She acted not out of madness, but out of knowledge, patience, and necessity. She turned oppression into reckoning, quietly but irreversibly. They assumed she would remain powerless. They assumed fear only moved in one direction. They were wrong. Whispers became stories. Stories became legends. Erasure is temporary. Memory is persistent. Her story survived because it carried a warning the powerful could not ignore. No system is unbreakable. No authority invulnerable. Even now, centuries later, her actions haunt history. Because she proved what everyone fears, the invisible can be unstoppable. She did not act for recognition. She did not ask for approval. She acted because the world demanded it. Silently, deliberately, unforgettably. Every minute she waited, every observation she made, every detail calculated, led to that one moment. The coal furnace was not random. It was justice in a form they could understand, delivered quietly, decisively. 14 men, a system shaken, a world forced to reconsider power. History tried to erase her. It could not. Her story lives in whispers, in shadows, in the unease that comes when power is challenged by patience and intelligence. Her story reminds us that fear is not owned by the strong. It can move, shift, and strike anyone who underestimates the prepared. In 1716, she stepped out of invisibility, and nothing in her world was ever the same. They tried to forget her. They thought silence could erase her. Hey, we're wrong. A year that looks ordinary on paper. But for her, it became the year the world she had always endured would finally witness the consequences of its cruelty. She was born into invisibility, not because the world permitted it. From childhood, she learned the language of power: obedience, silence, endurance. She watched her mother bow her head while injustice walked by. She watched men in fine coats decide who lived, who suffered without ever being questioned. She learned that the system had only two rules: obey or be destroyed. She obeyed. She survived. Years passed, and the lessons accumulated. Every act of cruelty, every small injustice, became a stone in the foundation of a plan no one would ever see coming. History likes to call such acts madness. She called it logic. She called it patience. She called it survival transformed into consequence. The plantation owners never noticed her. She blended into the background. Useful, replaceable, invisible. That invisibility became her power. She observed patterns, weaknesses, and arrogance. Men believed that fear only flowed downward. They were wrong. Her opportunity arrived in the form of the coal furnace. Ordinary, overlooked, a tool of labor and control. No one imagined it could become a weapon. No one imagined she could turn their world upside down without raising a single voice. The first disappearance was subtle. A man never returned from work. Accidents were assumed. The second, third, fourth, the pattern became undeniable. Yet still no one suspected her. 14 men in total. Every disappearance precise. Every outcome deliberate. Fear spread quietly. At first, confusion, then tension, then panic. The powerful